The ballroom of the Waldorf Grand was alive with the shimmer of diamonds and the murmur of champagne glasses. Waiters glided through the crowd, carrying trays of oysters and caviar. The string quartet played a piece so polished it felt mechanical, like every note was designed to announce wealth. For Lily Evans, standing near the service corridor with a tray of empty flutes, the glittering world felt as unreachable as the stars outside the tall glass windows. She had been working double shifts for weeks to cover the hospital bills of her father. Tonight was just another evening of carrying glasses, offering polite smiles, and pretending she belonged in this palace of marble floors and crystal chandeliers. She had almost convinced herself she was invisible when a voice froze her blood. Jake, her ex-boyfriend. The boy who once promised forever, but who had broken her with lies and betrayal. She turned too late. He was already there, dressed in a cheap suit, borrowed from a friend, smirking as if the entire ballroom belonged to him. His words cut through the music. Still serving drinks, Lily. Are you still pretending you are better than the rest of us? You look pathetic among these people. A few guests turned their heads, curious about the commotion. Lily felt her cheeks burn. She clutched the tray harder, wishing she could melt into the floor. She whispered for him to go away, but Jake stepped closer, his breath heavy with alcohol. He lowered his voice, just enough to sting. Remember how you swore you would escape your little life? You are still here. You will never escape. Lily's throat tightened. The memories of his infidelity, of finding him with another girl only months ago, pressed down on her like chains. She wanted to scream, but instead she stood frozen until another presence entered the circle. Ethan Cross. His name alone made the air shift. He was the man every newspaper called the coldest billionaire in New York, the mogul whose eyes could freeze a boardroom. Tall, perfectly groomed, with the detached aura of someone who had seen love turn into betrayal. Ethan radiated a power that silenced the music around him. He had not planned to notice the young waitress, but the sight of her cornered by an insolent man dragged him forward before he thought twice. His voice was calm, dangerously calm. Leave now. Jake laughed, trying to puff his chest, but when Ethan's steel-gray eyes locked on him, his bravado collapsed. Security appeared from nowhere. In moments, Jake was gone, thrown out into the street. Lily stood trembling, humiliated by the scene. She tried to thank Ethan, but her voice cracked. He studied her for a beat too long. There was something in her eyes, not just fear, but dignity, refusing to collapse. For reasons he could not explain, he said quietly, "Come with me." She hesitated. He added, "You need a moment away from the crowd." It was not a question. It was command softened by concern. She nodded. He led her through a private elevator to the upper suite. The door closed behind them, muting the laughter of the party. The room was quiet, filled with the scent of cedarwood. Lily gripped her hands, ashamed of her tears. Ethan gestured toward the bathroom. "Freshen up. Take your time." She whispered a thank you and disappeared inside. Alone, Ethan paced. He hated these moments. Ever since his ex-fiancée had walked out of his life years ago to marry his rival, he had built a fortress of ice around his heart. Women were dangerous. Women were deceit. He used them, never trusted them. But why had he intervened tonight? Why had he brought her here? The sound of the bathroom door opening pulled him from his thoughts. Lily stepped out, her face damp from washing, strands of hair sticking to her cheeks. She looked fragile yet defiant, as if refusing to break no matter how hard the world pushed her. She tried to leave quickly, eyes on the carpet, but the heel of her shoe caught the polished tile. She slipped. Ethan lunged forward, instinctively catching her around the waist. Momentum carried them both sideways. In the scramble, they tumbled into the marble tub behind them. Water from the faucet sprayed against the porcelain, soaking their clothes. For a breathless second, they froze. His hand was braced against the curve of her back, her palms pressed against his chest. Their eyes collided. The world outside ceased to exist. Lily's lips parted, a whisper caught between apology and fear. Ethan felt something shatter inside him. Years of bitterness and mistrust crumbled beneath the rush of desire. Without thinking, he lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was hesitant for a fraction, then ignited into fire. She gasped, then clutched him tighter. The taste of champagne and salt from her tears blended with the intoxicating heat of the moment. The kiss deepened. She tried to protest, tried to remind herself he was untouchable, but her body betrayed her. Every nerve screamed for more. Ethan pressed her gently against the cool porcelain, his control unraveling. The billionaire, who had sworn never to fall again, was undone by the trembling girl in his arms. Her innocence burned brighter than any of the chandeliers downstairs. The kiss became urgent, desperate, pulling them into a storm neither could escape. Later, as the city lights shimmered through the wide suite windows, clothes lay discarded on the marble floor. The night stretched into an intensity Lily had never known. For Ethan, it was both torment and release, as if every wound of betrayal was cauterized by the purity of her touch. They moved with reckless abandon, then with tenderness that surprised even him. Time blurred, and the ice around his soul cracked open with every sigh she gave, every shiver under his hands. When dawn finally touched the skyline, Ethan sat at the edge of the bed watching Lily sleep. She looked peaceful, fragile, completely unaware of the chain she had unknowingly wrapped around his heart. He clenched his fists. He hated weakness, yet he could not deny it. For the first time since his fiancée had betrayed him, Ethan Cross felt something terrifying. He wanted this girl. He wanted her beyond logic, beyond reason. And he knew with a clarity that struck like lightning that last night was not a mistake. It was the beginning of something that could either destroy him or finally set him free. Lily Evans woke up the next morning not in luxury, but in a cold panic. She had left Ethan's suite before dawn, slipping into her cheap coat and sneakers, terrified of what the night meant. For him, perhaps, it had been indulgence, a whim, but for her, it had changed everything. As she hurried through the subway station, back to her tiny apartment in Queens, her phone buzzed with a reminder from the hospital. The bills for her father's treatment had passed $50,000. Her stomach twisted. She was barely keeping up with the interest. Her father, once a mechanic, who had worked endless hours to send her to college, now lay silent, hooked to machines after the accident that had crushed his spine. She had promised him she would finish school, make him proud, and save him. But every passing day, that promise felt like a cruel joke. When she arrived home, the air in the cramped apartment was thick with tension. Her stepmother, Carla, sat on the couch with a cigarette in one hand and a wineglass in the other, flipping through channels. Carla had long ago drained the family's insurance payout and used it to gamble and spend on her new boyfriend. When Lily confronted her, Carla only sneered. "Do not look at me like that, sweetie. Your father's medical bills are not my problem. I already did my share. He chose to marry me, did he not? You are the one still hanging on." Lily's fists clenched, but she bit back the words. She knew shouting would not bring back the money that was gone. She slipped into her father's room. Machines beeped softly around him, tubes connected to his body. His once strong hands were now pale and thin. She took his hand and whispered, "Dad, please hold on. I will figure this out." Tears burned her eyes, but she wiped them quickly. She could not afford weakness. At school, things were no better. Her classmates whispered when she passed. They laughed at her thrift store clothes and the way she always rushed off to her part-time jobs. She overheard one girl mutter that Lily was pathetic, clinging to dreams of graduating when everyone knew she could not afford tuition much longer. Lily forced herself to walk with her head high. She would not let them see her crack. After lectures, she rushed to her job at the coffee shop, then changed uniforms to work late nights at the hotel. Each shift blurred into the next until her body ached constantly. Still, every paycheck barely touched the mountain of debt. Sometimes she skipped meals so she could save a few dollars for her father's prescriptions. Loneliness pressed in like a storm. Friends she once had drifted away, tired of her constant refusals to hang out. They did not understand how every hour mattered, how every tip meant another chance to keep her father alive. Nights were the worst. She would collapse on her narrow bed, exhausted, but sleep refused to come. She would stare at the ceiling and remember Ethan's eyes, the fire that had consumed her in the marble tub. Shame and longing battled inside her. She told herself it was a mistake, a lapse, nothing more. Yet the memory of his touch haunted her, a warmth she could not erase. She could not ask him for help. Pride chained her. She would not be a woman who traded her body for money. Still, reality was merciless. The hospital called again, warning that if payments were not made, the treatment plan would be cut. She felt as if the walls of her world were caving in. Her stepmother shouted at her one night when Lily refused to hand over her last paycheck. "You think you are so noble?" She spat. "You are just a fool dragging us down. No one cares about your father. Let him go." Lily slapped the counter in rage. "He is my father. I will never let him go." She fled to her room before her tears betrayed her. On the desk lay stacks of unpaid bills, threatening letters from collection agencies. Her hands shook as she pressed her forehead against them. How long could she fight alone? Her pride was a shield, but also a prison. She knew Ethan could wipe away her debts with a single gesture, but the thought of begging him turned her stomach. She remembered his cold reputation, the rumors of his ruthlessness. What if to him she was just another girl in a long list? He had looked at her differently, she told herself, but maybe she was fooling herself. Outside the city roared with life. Inside her tiny room, Lily curled into herself, feeling smaller than ever. And yet, somewhere beneath the despair, a spark remained. She would keep going for her father, for the memory of the family they once had. No matter how cruel the world was, she would not bow. Ethan Cross sat in his office, high above Manhattan, the skyline stretching endlessly through floor-to-ceiling windows, but the view gave him no peace. The city was his kingdom, every contract and merger another brick in the empire. He had built with merciless precision, yet the silence inside him was unbearable. He leaned back in his leather chair, the memory of Lily Evans, intruding again without permission. He hated that he could still feel the press of her lips, the shiver of her body against his in the tub. He had sworn never to allow desire to turn into attachment, not after what had happened years ago. He was 27 then, already a millionaire, but not yet hardened. He had believed in love, or thought he had, when Victoria Langley entered his world. She was radiant, a daughter of one of the city's oldest families, her laughter like music in the marble halls of the Cross Estate. For months he had been consumed planning a future, with her blind to the whispers around him. On the morning of their engagement party, as the staff decorated the ballroom with roses and champagne, Ethan received a single message. Victoria would not come. By sunset, he learned the truth. She had run away with his rival, a man he despised, taking not only Ethan's trust, but also valuable company secrets. The betrayal was catastrophic. It nearly shattered Cross Enterprises, left Ethan humiliated in every newspaper. Since then, he had lived by one rule: never again. Women were not companions, they were distractions or threats. He kept them close, only when convenient, always disposable. His reputation as the coldest billionaire in New York was not an accident. It was armor forged from heartbreak. Yet when he closed his eyes, he saw Lily. Not polished, not calculating, just trembling and brave and infuriatingly pure. He had seen hundreds of women throw themselves at him, whisper promises of loyalty while eyeing his wealth. But Lily had not asked him for a cent. She had fled his suite before dawn, leaving nothing behind but a silence that gnawed at him. That difference unsettled him more than he could admit. His assistant knocked and entered with documents listing figures from a recent merger. Ethan signed automatically, his mind elsewhere. He remembered the way Lily's eyes had glistened with unshed tears when that man Jake had mocked her. It made his jaw tighten. Why did it matter? He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more, a fleeting distraction. Yet he found himself checking the guest lists of future hotel events, wondering if she would be working. He told himself he would dismiss her from his thoughts. But when he returned to his penthouse at night, the emptiness of the rooms pressed down on him. He poured himself scotch, the amber liquid burning his throat, but the burn was dull compared to the ache in his chest. He had spent years burying his heart under steel. One night with her, one kiss, in that damned marble tub, and cracks had formed. He remembered the feeling of her hand trembling against his chest, not with calculation, but with fear and hope mixed together. He tried to drown the memory with work, burying himself in meetings and numbers, but every pause allowed her image to surface. His board members noticed the distraction. His closest advisor asked if something was wrong. Ethan snapped at him, then regretted it. He knew the truth, but would not voice it. Lily had slipped past his defenses, and that was dangerous. His past whispered warnings. Victoria had smiled just as sweetly once, but when he compared the two memories, the difference was undeniable. Victoria's beauty had been rehearsed. Lily's was unguarded. Victoria's kiss had tasted of ambition, Lily's of desperation and honesty. Ethan clenched his fists. He despised weakness. He despised that one girl could threaten to undo everything he had built. And yet he could not forget her, could not erase the way she had looked at him with eyes that seemed to see past the billionaire facade into the broken man he tried to hide. He knew this would not end here. He knew fate, or perhaps his own restless heart, would pull her back into his life again. And when that happened, he would have to choose between the vow that kept him safe and the temptation that might just ruin him. Ethan did not wait long before creating an excuse to see Lily again. He told himself it was business when he arranged for her to work as his temporary assistant, but deep down he knew it was obsession. When Lily received the offer, she almost refused. She had promised herself she would stay away from him, that their night together was a mistake, born of chaos, but the money was far better than her coffee shop shifts, and she could not ignore the crushing hospital bills. So she agreed reluctantly, her stomach tied in knots from the thought of being near him again. The first day in his office was torture. Ethan sat behind his desk, immaculate in his tailored suit, his gaze sharp as a blade. He barely acknowledged her, except to hand her tasks, but the silence between them was charged, every glance a spark. She felt his presence even when he did not speak, a constant pressure against her skin. At a board meeting, he instructed her to sit beside him. Her hands trembled slightly as she took notes, aware of the warmth radiating from his shoulder, only inches away. Once, when she leaned forward to pass him a document, his fingers brushed hers. The contact was brief, but it jolted through her like lightning. She jerked back, cheeks burning, while his expression did not change, though his eyes lingered on her a moment too long. The tension grew heavier with every passing day. He insisted she accompany him on a trip to Boston for a negotiation. On the private jet, she tried to bury herself in files, but every time she looked up, he was watching her. When turbulence shook the cabin, she gasped and grabbed the armrest. He covered her hand with his firm and steady, whispering softly that she was safe. The intimacy of his voice unraveled her composure. That night at the hotel, she lay awake replaying the moment, the feel of his hand over hers, the hidden gentleness beneath his steel. She hated herself for longing for more. Another evening, he summoned her to a gala. He handed her a black evening gown without explanation. When she stepped out in it, his eyes darkened. He did not compliment her aloud, but the hunger in his gaze made her pulse race. Throughout the night, his hand rested lightly at her back, guiding her through the crowd. Every time he leaned close to murmur instructions, she could feel his breath against her ear. At one point, a man attempted to flirt with her, ignoring the fact she stood beside Ethan. Before she could respond, Ethan's arm wrapped around her waist possessively, and his cold voice cut through the air. "She is with me." The man retreated instantly. Lily's heart pounded. She should have been angry at his arrogance, but instead a dangerous thrill coursed through her veins. They argued often, her pride clashing with his control. In the car after one event, she snapped at him for treating her like property. His jaw tightened. He leaned closer, his voice low. "Do you really think I see you as ordinary property, Lily?" His eyes burned into hers until she could not breathe. The air crackled between them, the tension thick enough to suffocate. She turned away, but he caught her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. For a heartbeat, she thought he would kiss her, and the thought terrified her because she knew she would not resist. He released her suddenly, as if angry at himself, and the silence between them was louder than any words. The unspoken desire hovered constantly. In the office, in the car, at dinners, every stolen glance and accidental brush of hands deepened the pull. Lily tried to bury herself in duty, to remember the hospital bills and her father's frail body, but Ethan's presence consumed her thoughts. She could feel the battle inside him too, the way he struggled between restraint and temptation. Sometimes his eyes softened when he thought she was not looking, but then he would mask it with ice. For Ethan, control was survival. For Lily, resistance was pride. Yet every moment they spent together chipped away at those defenses, until the line between employer and employee blurred, until they were two hearts caught in a storm they could no longer deny. The longer Lily remained by Ethan's side, the more ruthless the world became. It started with whispers in the Cross Enterprises lobby, glances that lingered too long, secretaries murmuring behind manicured hands. Soon it spread into tabloids. One morning as she walked into the office, she froze at the headline flashing across the digital billboard outside the building. Billionaire caught with student girl. The photo was grainy but unmistakable. Ethan escorting her into his car after a gala, his hand resting at her back. By the time she reached the elevator, her phone buzzed relentlessly with messages from classmates, some mocking, some cruel. Gold digger, clout chaser. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, but kept her head high as she walked past curious employees. Ethan was already at his desk when she entered, the newspaper folded neatly in front of him. His jaw was set in stone. She waited for him to speak, but he only gestured for her to sit and continue her tasks. Yet she felt his gaze linger longer than usual, as if measuring her reaction. The board of directors convened a meeting within days. Ethan attended with Lily at his side, ignoring the sharp intake of breath from the older men. One silver-haired director spoke bluntly. "This relationship is tarnishing the Cross name. Our investors demand stability. You must marry someone of equal status, someone who strengthens our alliances." Ethan's voice was calm, but carried the weight of iron. "My personal life is not up for negotiation." Another director sneered. "The girl is a liability. If you want to maintain control, you must end this distraction." Lily sat stiffly, her hands clenched under the table, fighting the urge to run. She had never wanted to be the center of scandal yet. Here she was accused of crimes she had never committed. Outside the boardroom, reporters swarmed. Questions about her background, her intentions, her father's hospital bills were hurled at her. Paparazzi cameras flashed like lightning. She lowered her head, fighting tears. Ethan shielded her with his arm, guiding her through the chaos with unflinching resolve. But every step deepened her dread. At school, the cruelty sharpened. Once friendly peers now called her shameless. Some whispered that she had traded her body for tuition. A professor even pulled her aside and asked if she needed to withdraw until the storm passed. Her pride screamed no, but her heart ached. Nights at the hospital were no relief. Carla, her stepmother, sneered as she waved the tabloids. "Look at you. You think you are some fairy tale princess. You are nothing but a scandal." The bitterness in her voice was poison. Lily escaped into her father's room, clutching his still hand, whispering through tears that she would not break. As if fate intended to test her Victoria Langley, Ethan's ex-fiancée returned. She appeared at a gala in a shimmering gown, her smile sweet and venomous. She embraced Ethan as if old wounds were forgotten, then turned to Lily with a gaze dripping in disdain. "So you are the little charity project? How quaint." Lily burned with humiliation, but forced herself to stand tall. Ethan's hand tightened around hers, a silent declaration, but Victoria leaned close to him, and whispered loudly enough for Lily to hear. "Everyone knows she is using you. She needs your money." Ethan's eyes darkened, but he said nothing, only pulled Lily away. Yet the seed of doubt planted by Victoria festered in Lily's chest. Each passing day the pressure mounted. Her classmates avoided her, the media stalked her, the crossboard threatened Ethan's authority, and Victoria spread rumors that Lily was manipulating him. At home, Carla shouted that Lily should take advantage of Ethan's wealth before he discarded her. Everywhere Lily turned, the world demanded she prove her worth. But how could she when even her dignity was questioned? She lay awake many nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was destroying Ethan's empire just by existing near him. The burden was unbearable. Still, she refused to surrender. She told herself she would endure for her father, for the sliver of hope she saw in Ethan's eyes when he let his guard slip. Yet deep down she feared that one day the weight of the world would crush her and there would be no one left to pick up the pieces. The first signs were subtle but undeniable. Lily had always been punctual with her cycles, and now they were late. At first, she told herself it was the stress of scandal and exhaustion from endless shifts. But when nausea hit her one morning at the coffee shop, she nearly collapsed behind the counter. The truth gnawed at her with every passing day, until she found herself sitting in a clinic, hands trembling as she clutched the test results. Positive. She was carrying Ethan Cross's child. Her mind reeled. She had barely survived the storm of tabloids labeling her a gold digger, and now this secret threatened to explode into something far worse. She pressed the paper against her chest, whispering through tears that she could not let anyone know, not yet. She returned home pale and shaken, hiding the truth even from her father. At night, she stared at the ceiling, torn between terror and wonder. Inside her grew a piece of the man she both feared and longed for. Days later, her world shattered. Paparazzi had followed her to the clinic. Photos of her leaving the building appeared on the front page with screaming headlines. "Student traps billionaire with baby." The internet erupted. Strangers spewed venom online, calling her a manipulator who had slept her way to fortune. At Cross Enterprises, the board was furious. "This is intolerable," one member shouted. "The company cannot be dragged down by a scandal child." Ethan listened in silence. His jaw clenched, his hands fisted under the table. That night, he confronted Lily in his penthouse. "Tell me the truth. Is it mine?" His eyes were sharp, his voice edged with betrayal. Her heart broke at the question. "Of course it is yours. Do you think I would lie about something like this?" She begged him to believe her, but his expression was unreadable. Years of betrayal had taught him distrust, and the echo of Victoria's deceit poisoned his thoughts. "You could have told me earlier. You could have come to me." Instead, the world hears it first. His words cut deeper than knives. She tried to explain that she had wanted to protect him, that she had been terrified. But he turned away, staring out at the city lights, as if they could answer the storm inside him. For Ethan, it was chaos. He wanted to believe her, yet every scar from the past screamed caution. For Lily, it was devastation. She left the penthouse that night with tears streaming down her face, convinced that what they had shared had only been a mistake to him. On the subway ride home, she cradled her stomach, whispering a promise to the unborn child. "No matter what happens, I will protect you." Her pride would not allow her to beg for Ethan's help again. She would endure the whispers, the judgment, and even the loneliness, if it meant her baby could live. But the wound of his doubt festered. For all the fire they had shared, for all the tender moments that had slipped past his armor, he had still looked at her as if she might be a liar. That truth crushed her heart more than all the gossip in the world. Lily's world collapsed further when the hospital called one evening with news that nearly broke her. Payments had fallen behind again, and without immediate funds, her father's treatment would be cut. She begged for more time, but the administrator was firm. "We cannot keep the machines running without payment." Desperation clawed at her chest. She rushed home to confront Carla, only to find her stepmother laughing, with her boyfriend a glass of wine in hand. Carla shrugged when Lily demanded answers. "I am not wasting another cent on a man who is already half dead. Let him go." Lily's fury shook her entire body, but she realized words were useless. She locked herself in her father's room, clutching his frail hand as machines beeped steadily. "Please hold on, Dad. I will not let them take you away." Tears soaked her cheeks as she whispered promises she did not know how to keep. That night she walked through the city in the rain, clutching her coat around her. She had sworn never to crawl to Ethan, never to beg, but despair was swallowing her whole. She paused outside Cross Tower, staring up at the glass monument to his power. She could not do it. Pride anchored her steps and she turned away. But fate had other plans. The next morning, as she left the hospital, she found herself surrounded by reporters. Microphones shoved into her face. "Miss Evans, is it true you are pregnant with Ethan Cross's child? Is it true you trapped him to pay your father's bills? Do you expect marriage?" Lily froze, overwhelmed, until a familiar shadow loomed over her. Ethan appeared tall and commanding. His presence silencing the crowd, he wrapped an arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. His voice was cold but carried across every microphone. "She's mine, and the baby is mine." The world seemed to stop. Cameras flashed wildly. Lily's heart hammered in her chest. She should have felt relief, but instead humiliation burned. He had not asked. He had declared, turning her life into a public statement. Later, in the quiet of his car, she trembled with anger. "You cannot just claim me like a business asset. I am not a deal to protect your reputation." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I did it to protect you, to protect our child." She shook her head, tears streaming. "No, you did it to protect yourself. You do not trust me. You think I am just another Victoria waiting to betray you." His silence was answer enough. She pulled away from him, refusing to let him see how shattered she was. That night, she left his penthouse with no intention of returning. She would rather face poverty and scorn than live as his business transaction. Ethan watched her go, every instinct screaming to chase after her, but pride and fear held him frozen. Only later, alone in the vast emptiness of his home, did the truth strike him with crushing clarity. He did not care about the board, the media, or his fortune. He cared about her. He cared about the child growing inside her. The realization was terrifying but undeniable. For the first time in years, love not power drove his heart. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between them was unbearable. Lily worked herself to exhaustion trying to cover bills while protecting her unborn child. She refused to answer Ethan's calls at first, but he did not give up. One morning he appeared at the hospital cafeteria with 2 coffees and without a word sat across from her. She wanted to scream at him to leave, But when he gently slid a folder of paid receipts across the table, her anger faltered. He had covered every outstanding cost for her father. She whispered that she had never asked him to do this. His reply was quiet but firm. "You should not have to." Slowly, the ice began to crack. He started showing up in small ways. One evening, he arrived at her apartment kitchen with grocery bags and rolled up his sleeves to cook. She laughed through tears at his clumsy attempts to dice onions. The billionaire who had conquered boardrooms now fighting with a frying pan. On weekends, he drove her to prenatal classes, sitting beside her on the floor as instructors taught breathing techniques. Other fathers chuckled, seeing the infamous Ethan Cross practicing silly exercises, but he did not care. His hand stayed steady on Lily's back as she struggled to follow instructions, whispering encouragement until she smiled. At night, he would massage her swollen feet, his once cold hands surprisingly gentle. He learned to time her morning sickness, to keep crackers by the bed, to remind her to drink water. Each small gesture healed a wound inside her, proving that beneath his armor, he was capable of devotion. For Ethan, the transformation was startling. He had never imagined himself as a caretaker, never believed he could open his heart again. Yet with Lily, every act of service felt like redemption. She was no longer just the girl he had found trembling in a hotel ballroom. She was his partner, his future, the mother of his child. For Lily, the healing was deeper still. Years of betrayal, poverty, and loneliness had convinced her she was destined to fight alone. Now she began to trust that someone could stand beside her without abandoning her. She still carried scars, but in Ethan's steady presence, she discovered that love could be strength, not weakness. In quiet moments, with her head resting on his chest and his hand tracing gentle circles over her stomach, she dared to imagine a life not defined by pain, but by hope. Peace was fragile and did not last. The moment the world sensed vulnerability, it struck again. Tabloids splashed new headlines across front pages. Ex-fiancé returns to reclaim cross-fortune. Victoria Langley stood at the center of the storm, elegant and venomous, whispering to every journalist who would listen that Lily's child was not Ethan's. She produced forged messages and doctored photos implying Lily had been involved with other men. The scandal ignited like wildfire. Investors panicked, the crossboard convened an emergency session, and reporters camped outside Lily's apartment. Inside the boardroom, voices thundered. "Step down, Ethan. Protect the company. Your reckless affair has cost us credibility." Ethan listened, his fists clenched. Across town, Lily endured strangers spitting accusations, classmates snickering that she had been caught lying. The humiliation pressed on her chest until she could barely breathe. When Ethan finally arrived at her door, his expression was hard, but his eyes burned with conflict. He told her about the board's ultimatum. They wanted him to abandon her publicly or risk losing his throne. Lily's pride flared. "Do it then. Save your empire. I do not need saving." Tears streamed, but her voice was steady. He stepped closer, every word heavy. "If loving you means losing everything, then I will gladly lose it all." Shock widened her eyes. She searched his face and found no hesitation. The man who once lived behind walls of ice was standing bare before her, choosing her over power, over wealth, over reputation. It was the confession she had never dared hope for. Days later, Victoria's lies unraveled under investigation. exposed as manipulations crafted to destroy Ethan once more. But the damage had been done. The company teetered, trust fractured. Still, Ethan did not waver. At a press conference, he held Lily's hand before the flashing cameras and declared his loyalty. "This woman is mine. The child she carries is mine. Nothing you say will change that." The crowd erupted with chaos, but his words carved through the noise like steel. For Lily, it was the moment she understood that love could be both shield and weapon. The storm raged around them, yet together they stood unbroken. The scandal faded slowly, as scandals always did, but the scars it left were real. Months passed, and Lily's belly grew each day, a reminder of the new life binding them together. The Cross family, once hostile, began to soften under the undeniable reality that an heir was coming. Ethan's grandmother, formidable and sharp-tongued, finally allowed Lily into the mansion and ordered preparations for a wedding. The halls filled with planners and designers. The press speculated about the most extravagant ceremony of the decade, and for a brief time, Lily permitted herself to dream of stability. Yet shadows lingered. On the morning of her dress fitting, a plain envelope was slipped under her apartment door. The note inside contained only a single sentence in block letters. "The truth about the baby is not what you think." Her heart lurched. She hid the message in a drawer, but its presence gnawed at her thoughts. She tried to convince herself it was a cruel trick, perhaps remnants of Victoria's spite. But at night, she lay awake beside Ethan, listening to his steady breathing, and wondered if the peace they had built was an illusion waiting to shatter. Ethan noticed her unease. He pulled her close, resting his hand over her stomach, murmuring that no matter what storms came, he would protect her and their child. She wanted to believe him completely, but doubt slithered in the corners of her mind. The wedding date drew nearer. Invitations were sent. The cathedral reserved, the media braced for the spectacle. Lily stood before mirrors in white silk, watching her reflection with both awe and fear. She had survived humiliation, gossip, and betrayal, yet the simple slip of paper threatened her more than any headline. On the eve of the wedding, she sat by her father's hospital bed, holding his fragile hand, whispering that she hoped to make him proud. His eyes fluttered open, just long enough to squeeze her fingers a fragile blessing. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she pressed her forehead to his. In that moment, she resolved to walk forward, no matter what secret the note implied. The morning of the ceremony dawned bright. The mansion buzzed with preparations. Ethan appeared at her door, breathtaking in his tuxedo, his steel gray eyes softened by a vulnerability only she had ever seen. He reached for her hand and kissed her knuckles. "No matter what the world says, you and our baby are my whole life." The vow trembled in the air, both promise and warning. As they walked together toward the waiting guests, flashes of cameras exploded, capturing the couple who had fought against scandal and betrayal to stand side by side. Yet in the quiet corners of Lily's heart, the words from the anonymous note echoed endlessly. "The truth about the baby is not what you think." The ceremony bells rang, the world cheered, and still uncertainty coiled like smoke around her. Love had brought them here fierce and unyielding, but destiny had left one more secret waiting in the shadows.